There we go.
All right, we are a minute early, so we're not going to quite jump into part one. It's the end of January. We've had nothing, it seems like, for 2 weeks of stratonimbus clouds, gray everywhere, right? And since I live on the top of a hill, often I'm sitting in what I call fog, really just is the bottom of the cloud.
There was a little bit of sun this morning.
That's true. A few little bits. You know what the pilots call those?
No.
Sucker holes. Because if you don't have a instrument license and you want to fly and you're not smart,
And you think it's
you can
good weather.
You can get up through the cloud cover, but then if it closes in, which is why the other saying is there's old pilots and they're bold pilots, but there are no old bold pilots.
Yes,
they said that about, unfortunately, now it's serious, Jack Kennedy. He didn't have an instrument rating, and he took off so late on that summer afternoon, early evening, that he got lost in the haze and disoriented and didn't know how to get down. So no use being bold, because that's being dumb. Moral of the day. Alrighty, before we start with our disasters, that's why we're all revved up. We've been sitting here for a half hour with the other new librarian, Jackie, who's pop in a little bit and talk about Storm Sandy. We've been talking about these disasters, and I think that gets the adrenaline going, right? Okay. But first, two interesting things on the astronomy front. So once again, Melanie looked it up online. I heard it on the radio. So you want to show them a comet is passing by. A new one. That isn't going to be back for 50,000 years, folks. So if it doesn't clear up the sky tonight, we probably won't see it.
Not open those.
Well, she's going to work on opening that up. But it was astronomers a month or 2 or 3 ago discovered this new comet, which is actually, isn't that beautiful? It's greenish, visible to the naked eye if the sky is clear and you have decent vision. And Melanie we finally found out where in the sky to look if the clouds ever go away. So can we see where to look? Up to the north. Oh, what's all that?
This is Polaris here.
The North Star. So you got to look north, guys.
Yep. And then these are the dates where you'll see it. So like this was yesterday, January 26th. So
between we all know the Big Dipper down here. And if you look for it, can find the Little Dipper, whose the end of the handle is our North Star. And so where will it be tonight? It'll be this way.
Yep, it's moving this way. So it'll be in this area somewhere.
Okay, but moving more towards the east, looking generally north.
Yes.
And then to the right would be the east. All righty. Once again, you do need clear skies because it's not that bright, but they say you should be able to see it with the naked eye.
Yeah.
Okay, you want to flip back so we can see what it looks like if we don't get to see the real thing?
Yeah, I guess the green color is kind of what makes it unique.
I guess. Now, I heard NPR had it on twice. And on the second time on Science Friday, they elaborated a bit. And if I can remember correctly, the green color comes from a special form of carbon. 2 carbon atoms that are somehow hooked together. And they are, when they're excited, and maybe I'm not quite right on this next point, split apart.
Okay.
They emit
a greenish
energy in the wavelength of green light. So we see it as green. Or was that the aurora borealis? Oh my. Well, look it up and find out what makes it green. Because I just remembered I also was studying the aurora. Maybe that was the green. Okay. That was number 1. Number 2, and this happened, I believe, Wednesday. Did we get a picture of it, or what did we?
No, I did not get a picture of it.
All right. Once again, on the news. Are you folks aware of what NEOs are?
Near Earth objects.
Near Earth objects. Y'all remember what happened to the dinosaurs 65 million years ago when an asteroid or possibly a comet as large as New York City whammed into the Caribbean off the Yucatan Peninsula and devastated life on Earth. Something like close to 90% of species within a year or two were gone. Pretty. Usually things happen gradually on Earth, but every now and again there is a catastrophe. And probably the dinosaurs vanished within a day or two, they say now. Anyway, since that was first realized starting in the 70s by two scientists, father and son, one an astronomer and one, I believe, a geologist. And at first there was a lot of resistance, no idea. But by the late 90s, it was pretty well confirmed. And then our Congress got off their butt and said, oh, well, if this happened once, it might happen again. And now you're going to Hollywood and B-rate movies, right? Yep. However, we have a small staff of astronomers who are constantly looking for near Earth objects that would be big enough to do damage. We're hit by thousands and thousands of meteors every year, meteorites, but they're so tiny, most of them burn up, or if they do land, they're not very big. Okay, now we do have a meteor crater. Oh, yeah. So and once again, check it, but I think it was 50,000 years ago. The last time that green comet came around. And wow, it hit the Earth. How did we find out how big that one was?
It's just under a mile in diameter.
The crater.
Yep, and just over 500 feet deep.
And that's been sitting there in the relatively dry desert for, I'm thinking 50,000 years. But once again, guys, double check. When did it hit? Possible serious damage. Well, anyway, I'm listening to the news on Wednesday, I believe it was. Oh, there's a boxcar-sized asteroid that's going to be passing over the tip of South America Wednesday night or Wednesday morning. Only 20,000, no.
2,200.
2,000.
Yeah, 200 feet.
Here to Denver. It's not very far, guys. But obviously it missed. It didn't deviate at the last minute. Now, help me out here, Melanie. This is off the cuff. I didn't warn her about this. A year or two ago, didn't we actually send a mission?
Yes.
Yeah, to see if we could bump off course a small asteroid. Right?
And they also took samples of it too, for some reason.
Before or after they bumped it?
I don't remember, but yes, they did. Yeah.
And it did work. But it was a small asteroid. It's like playing a game of billiards or pool.
Yep.
If you know how to hit it at a certain angle at a certain speed, it'll knock the ball into the hole. Okay. Now, whether we could do that with something the size of New York City, I doubt.
Right.
But it's we all sit here laughing because we believe it's never going to happen in our lifetime, right? Right. Okay. I just thought while I was thinking about Jordan, who wasn't able to join us, and his UFO information and other stuff, I just remember another folktale that my grandmother used to say. Have you ever heard this one? When your cat sleeps curled up with the head upside down, it's going to storm.
No,
never.
I've not heard this one.
And as I got older, then you begin to question these things. Why could that be? Could there be any scientific basis to that?
Right.
Well, I know certain animals are much more aware of the change in air pressure. And you know how it is when you go up in a plane, especially if you have an ear infection or a cold, you can really hurt your eardrums because of the pressure not being equalized inside and outside of the ear. So my thinking was when I was a teenager, well, maybe it has something to do with the air pressure.
Sure.
Storms, low pressure,
Mhm.
the cat's sensitive ears, those big
Mhm.
ears. And why sleeping with the head upside down would alleviate the pain, I don't know.
Mhm.
So if anybody's out there, a vet, someone who studies ears, maybe you can do some research and let us know
Yeah.
here at the Box of Books Library. All right, I guess we better stop yammering away here and get on to the topic, weather disasters, and we're basically going to talk mostly about hurricanes and tornadoes, touch on an ice storm again, just
Mhm.
briefly. I want to just take 2 minutes to review.
Mhm.
Weather is a balance
Mhm.
between in the atmosphere, mainly concerned with temperature
Mhm.
and humidity and air pressure.
Mhm.
And when things get out of balance, unstable, and that usually means the warm air is trapped on top of, no. I'm going to forget that statement because now I'm rethinking it and I'm not sure of the answer. We're just going to say when the air becomes unstable
Mhm.
because there's a difference in temperature and humidity, which produces a difference in the pressure. And usually storms for us are connected with low pressure,
Mhm.
a low pressure system. And the greater the difference between the two systems, two masses of air, the more dangerous the storm can become. The greater the wind, the greater the amount of rain or freezing rain. All right, hurry. Now, what kind of pictures have we got here?
Do you want to start with hurricane?
Yeah, we're starting with the hurricanes.
Do you want to start with a diagram or just some pictures?
Okay, what kind of pictures have you got?
We have a satellite image of Hurricane Dorian,
Uh-huh.
and then we have the aftermath of Katrina.
Okay, let's hold off on examples and we'll just
Okay.
deal with the theory first. Let's take a look. If you were flying high in the sky, by the way, we still do this, even though we have satellites now that can do a lot of this. There's actually a group of young, bold pilots who actually fly through the hurricane so they can acquire data on temperature, humidity, pressure. Okay.
Oh, good for them.
Good for them. This is high above, though. Was this one taken from the
Yes.
the Earth the shuttle?
No, I believe it was just
Because it's
from NOAA. So I don't know how they get their
okay.
images.
Well, they have satellites up.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have images from the space shuttle, which is about, I'm rounding off, 250 miles up. But here we have, you want to use your little magic button. There's Florida. Is that like Okeechobee?
Yeah, must be. Yep.
Okay. And there, oh, look. They actually took chalk on the land and made the outline of the states. Georgia and then South Carolina. Yep. Then we start swinging up to the northeast. Alrighty. Which way is this swirling? Counterclockwise or clockwise?
Clockwise. No, counterclockwise.
Right. When you're a little
going this way.
Okay, there you go. Around and around and around, counterclockwise. And okay, these hurricanes can actually be anywhere from 300 miles, which is like from here to New York City, or 1,000 miles. What's 1,000 miles? Here to a couple of 100 miles across the Mississippi, in the middle of Kansas. So some of them are very big. What's that right in the middle, near where your little white arrow, which should be red, so there. What's that?
The eye.
The eye of the storm. Or the calm before we grew up for thousands of years as an agricultural society. And so many of our sayings and predictions are connected to either growing or the weather. Sometimes you don't think about it.
Right.
But that's where the eye of the storm. You're in the center and it may all be calm, but all around you is destruction.
Yeah.
The eye of the storm can be anywhere from 2 to 30 miles in diameter. And when you experience that, as this storm system is passing over you, and I'm assuming this one's moving up
Mhm.
towards 1 or 2 o'clock at an angle towards the northeast. All of a sudden the winds die, the sky gets clear,
Mhm.
and the rain stops. But it's not over. It's only half
Yeah.
over. Alrighty. Now let me just one other thing before we move away from this wonderful picture. Alrighty. Let's talk briefly about landfall. So you live in Florida, and somebody lives up in North Carolina,
Mhm.
which is just up here. Now, see the way the winds are swirling? Depending on where landfall is compared to Florida, is going to make it better or worse for you. Because look how the winds are
Mhm.
swirling.
Yeah.
So in this case, the winds that are not bringing the water and are not, are coming down this way.
Mhm.
So Florida is not going to be as devastated as, wait a second here. Hang on, guys. I'm going to look at my picture. Where did I write that one down? Correct. However, if the landfall had been on the other side of Florida,
Mhm.
by the panhandle, then those swirling winds would have brought the full force of the winds plus the water that they've pushed in front of them.
Mhm.
So if the landfall was here in the panhandle, they would get clobbered more than the other side.
Mhm.
And I think, I forget one of those storms, not Katrina, I don't think, but Mobile
Mm.
in Mississippi, isn't it Mobile?
Alabama.
Alabama got much worse than New Orleans on
Mhm.
that particular storm because of where it
Sure.
came on shore.
Mhm.
So if you live along the coast, whether the Gulf Coast or up the Atlantic, where the hurricane hits is going to
Mhm.
affect you differently, where the
Mhm.
landfall is. All righty. We can move to that diagram you found, and let's first define things. Any large, powerful, low pressure system that is moving, we're going to talk about the Northern Hemisphere
Mhm.
because most people live in the North, goes counterclockwise. That in general is called a cyclone.
Mhm.
And maybe it's just a little C cyclone. However, we in America, in the Gulf Coast and on the Atlantic coast, call them hurricanes. Now, I don't know why we decided on hurricane. Well, I think it has something to do with Greek or Latin or both. However, if you live in Asia, we see here now, they're called typhoons.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And if you live in the Indian Ocean, they are called cyclones with capital C, like
Okay.
Bangladesh, India,
Okay.
those islands, maybe Australia.
Mhm.
I think Australia would be considered part of the Indian Ocean.
Mhm.
So anyway, those are three names: hurricanes, typhoons, and cyclones, that all designate where they happen in the world.
Mhm.
And they're all cyclones, little C's. Alrighty. To have a hurricane, you need torrential rains. Which produce floods and storm surges, which average between 3 and 6 feet above normal. Now, what's storm surge? I didn't ask you this before, but do you?
Is it the ocean water
Ocean
from
water?
disturbed from the hurricane
Right.
itself, the air itself?
Waves. If there's no wind, there are no waves.
Mhm.
The bigger the ocean or the sea, and the stronger the wind, the longer you can build up the height of the waves. So on average, a storm surge is the ocean water being pushed in front of the storm and getting higher and higher. But usually it's 3 to 6 feet. But every now and again, and when we get to the disasters, Katrina it was 23 feet.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. So, alrighty. To be a hurricane, you need 74-mile-an-hour winds.
Mm.
But sometimes, I think the strongest ever was 240
Mhm.
miles per hour. And that might have happened 2 or 3 years ago out on one of those islands in the South Pacific. I
Mhm.
think they broke all records. Alrighty. And we label them category 1
Mhm.
through 5, I think.
Mhm.
And once again, I'm not sure where, if the category 2 is 100 miles an hour.
Right,
But once again, you can look that up. But they kind of jump in roughly
right. It's
25.
based on the wind speed, right?
Wind speed, right. Alrighty, so now we name them A to Z. And once again, I didn't ask Melanie to look up. Do you happen to know? They used to always be named after women.
Right.
And then Women's Lib got going and they began to object.
Mhm.
Do you know? I don't remember when that was.
I don't remember either. We ran out of time looking it up, but
Okay.
yeah.
But then they decided, okay, we'll be fair. We'll add the guys as
Mhm.
well. Now, I don't know if they alternate or how they do.
do.
Oh, they
They,
alternate.
they alternate.
Do we still start with a woman with A?
I believe, no, we don't. Because each year it cycles back through.
Okay.
So
So
whatever,
it alternates.
yeah.
That's got to be politically correct and fair, right? Okay. However, did we find out a few years ago there were so many hurricanes, they ran the 26 letters they ran out.
Mhm.
So what did they do? Go back to A again?
They started back at A.
Back at A. All righty. Now, is it going to be like football and or basketball that if somebody is so famous, you retire their jersey and you will never use
Yeah.
Katrina again?
Right, they retire the names, yes.
That's the top of my head. I didn't know that.
There will never be another Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Sandy, probably Ian is now on there, the list of retired names.
All
We're
right.
on a name soon though,
Well, we can get
the way we're going.
creative with names. Later on, we're going to talk about the Galveston in 1900, but I don't know if that had a
Was it
name.
named yet?
I don't know. I don't know when we started naming them.
I don't.
It was just known as the Galveston.
Mhm.
Okay. Okay. How does it form? Can we make that picture bigger? Look at that magic. I'm ready. Without going into great detail, you all remember, I'm sure you remember, how cumulus clouds form on a summer day. So essentially, this is the same thing, but more so. You need a warm ocean. So you're not going to have hurricanes down in Antarctica or up at the North Pole. You need tropical waters, maybe, I'm going to guess 30 degrees either side of the equator. So the Indian Ocean, the Pacific Ocean around those latitudes, the mid-Atlantic Ocean, usually just a bit north of the equator. And so you have a source of the warmer the water, the more it evaporates. And that moist air then starts to rise because warm air is less dense than cool air. And as it rises, it finally reaches the dew point and begins to condense out as water droplets. And in so doing, gives up heat, latent heat. So a combination of a warm ocean water, which is evaporating, and then the heat produced in the cloud by the condensation starts this storm. And there are other things involved, but if it begins to swirl for us in the Northern Hemisphere counterclockwise, and it continues to build, then a hurricane can form. And once it forms, we won't really go into the Coriolis effect again, but it tends to drift northward and then for us northeastward. As soon as it runs into colder water, like the Labrador Current up off of northern New England, or over land, it loses its source of warm, moist air and therefore humidity, and then it tends to die out. Now that doesn't mean it doesn't have a lot of rain potential still there,
Sure.
as we in 72
Mhm.
from Agnes knows. Usually they drift up the coast.
Mhm.
They hit Savannah, Georgia, Charleston, South Carolina, the
Mhm.
Hatteras, Jersey, New York, Boston,
Mhm.
on into Canada. But every now and again, for
Mhm.
some complicated meteorological reason, they drift. This one drifted pretty much up the Appalachians
Mhm.
until it got to Western New York and Western PA.
Mhm.
And for some reason, it stalled. And there it sat swirling in a counterclockwise direction for 3 days over us, 3 or 4
Mhm.
days, dumping, which at the time in June, 11 inches of rain, as I remember, which caused the great floods of 72. So, okay, so that's how it forms and is fueled and moves.
So is this just my perception, or is this true that there's more hurricanes in the Atlantic Ocean than the Pacific? Why do we hear about more along the Atlantic
Okay,
coast than the Pacific?
now the Pacific, it's not California Pacific, it's Asian Pacific.
Asian Pacific, okay.
We don't live in China or Japan
Mhm.
or,
But why don't we get hurricanes along the California coast?
Because have you ever gone swimming off the coast of
I
California?
have not seen the Pacific Ocean, no.
It's damn cold.
Right, okay.
It's a
That's what I-
huge cold current that
Okay.
which causes the fog. And you don't go swimming there in
Okay.
Cal, maybe in San Diego, but not from San Francisco north, because I think the temperature of the water is 50s or so.
Okay,
So
it doesn't have that moist
it
water.
doesn't have the tropical moist air. Right. Very good question. Now, if you ever have a 5-year-old, and they say, "Mommy, why?" You'll know
Mhm.
the answer.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. The eye of the storm, we always talked about that. Landfall, talked about that. All right, damages. Sometimes the rain, now, you know what? With global warming and these crazy weather patterns we've been having lately, this doesn't seem like anything anymore. I mean, just think of how much rain California got in
Yeah.
like 10 days. However, in the old days, rain of 10 to 30 inches, 10 inches to 30 inches is pretty amazing,
Mhm.
and caused floods, like we
Mhm.
think of floods, too much rain. What's
Right.
this?
This is the aftermath of
Katrina.
Yep.
Okay. Now Katrina, which happened in 05
Mhm.
on Labor Day, right? I think just
Right around there, yeah.
to the day before or something. I call Katrina, that must be, is that the Mississippi River?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Katrina was a natural disaster and a man-made disaster. Something like, I'm going to say half, but I think it's more than half of New Orleans, starting back in the 1700s, I think with the French, or was it the Spanish, that first settled it after the Native Americans did. More than half the city is under the sea level. Right, guys, build your town, build your houses below sea level. By the way, an aside, you know what the Dutch have been doing in the last 10, 15 years? What are the Dutch famous for?
Tulips.
Yes. What else are the Dutch famous? What's that, Jackie? The dikes. That's Jackie from the taking care of the library, our new librarian. Dikes. They have reclaimed over the centuries land from the sea by building seawalls and dikes. You know, the little Dutch boy with his finger in the dike. And now they're realizing you can't really beat Mother Nature.
Right.
They're allowing some of their land to be reclaimed by the ocean, which is, I think, smart, especially with sea rise.
And in New Orleans, their levees broke
The
too.
levees broke. So not only were we kind of foolish to be building below sea level in a part of the country that periodically got hit with by hurricanes, we didn't take care of our levees. And once again, it's statistics. It's like Fukushima in Japan with the earthquake and then the tsunami. They built their walls to protect their nuclear reactors sitting at sea level
Mhm.
with, I'm thinking it was 18-foot walls.
Mm.
Because statistically, if you study the history, tsunamis never got higher than 18 feet. So we'll build it's expensive. We'll build a wall for 18 feet. Well, the tsunami was 36 feet, if
Mhm.
I recall, and just came right over swamped the nuclear power plants, turned off the electricity, allowed the thing to melt down. One of them, I think it did melt down,
Mhm.
didn't it? Yeah. Anyway, so it's always a gamble. The cost versus what's the chance of it
Mhm.
happening? Well, we can't really build for the 1,000-year flood,
Mhm.
not even the 100-year flood. Maybe we'll just build for the 10-year flood. And then along comes the 100-year flood or whatever,
Mhm.
and then you get wiped out. So it was, and then of course, the response was a man-made disaster.
And with climate change, they're increasingly more volatile.
Well, we'll get to that at the end, but since you brought it up, I'll mention it now. Yes, not everything that happens in the weather is going to get worse because of climate
Mhm.
change. I might, if I were to live another 50 years, actually be able to grow oranges in my backyard
Mhm.
here, which wouldn't be a bad thing. But with hurricanes, as global warming, by the way, really is a measure of the ocean's temperature
Mhm.
worldwide on an
Mhm.
average. As the ocean gets warmer,
Mhm.
it's going to evaporate more.
Mhm.
So the air will be more humid.
Mhm.
So not only will we have more hurricanes in the
Mhm.
Atlantic, but they will be stronger.
Mhm.
More moisture condensing, more latent heat,
Yeah,
more fuel to keep it going.
the weather-wise book that we have here,
Okay.
it said like 2005 was the costliest hurricane season on record.
Mhm.
But that book was published in 2010, but now 2020 is now the most costly hurricane season on
Mhm.
record.
Mhm. Mhm. Yep. Oh, well, what can you say? Now that storm surge averaged 3 to
Mhm.
6 feet above. I remember Jackie, can you come and tell us about the superstorm Sandy, which you say is actually a hurricane? I thought it was something different, but
Yeah,
Come-
it is classified as a hurricane.
okay.
You want to know what I remember about it? Is
Yeah,
that
what you
what you
remember about it?
do I remember? Okay. So
Do you want to squat down so that they're not looking?
At your middle?
Take a
I'm
minute.
sit on the floor. Okay, look at how I rate here. Okay, so
Our new library, Jackie.
I do remember it being, not to get too political, but it was handled a bit more structured than the previous storm in the previous administration, where George Bush didn't really do anything about Katrina. So I do remember the FEMA effort being better.
Mm-hmm.
I remember seeing people rowing down are we talking about Katrina or Sandy?
Sandy.
Sandy. Okay, so Sandy is New York City. And I
Mhm.
remember the hoax with you remember the sharks in the streets?
I heard about that in my
Yeah,
pictures of guys in
They-
goggles
they-
in the subway.
Yes, I remember that. And we in Hornell, I remember we had actually a couple that were refugees
From the city.
from the city. And it was a pretty big deal that they actually got out, because one of them was visually impaired
Mm.
and he was at his workplace when it happened.
Oh,
Yeah, it was pretty incredible that he got out. What else do I remember?
How many inches of rain fell?
Oh my,
What time of year was it?
October.
October.
Didn't it collide with a nor'easter or something? Because
Okay.
wasn't there like ice and stuff?
Here's what I remember. And folks, once again, double check it. I think, because I didn't call it a hurricane, and I don't think they called it a hurricane in those days, two things were happening. I'm assuming a northeaster was coming up the coast like it does with all its rain and wind, mostly rain. But then there was this other big system coming out of the west or northwest,
What was
And
it?
they-
Category 3?
and they collided over New York City. So you had all that extra rain. And I think it lasted longer than just zipping on by.
Was that October 22nd to the November 2nd is I think what we figured it out.
Okay.
Yeah, that was quite a length of time that
All
it was
right.
active.
Now, since we were talking about New York City, I was going towards the end of this, but I'll do it now. One of the problems, and people in New York City never thought about it, and they still don't think about it. We think, oh, someday Miami is going to get really clobbered. And let's move a little bit farther apart because I'm still doing this 3 feet distancing with COVID hovering. Sorry, Jackie.
I understand.
Yeah. We think of, Miami's going to get clobbered. And once in a while it's Charleston or somewhere in the coast of Virginia. But if you look, the scientists have been saying for years, New York City is set up to be a real disaster, just like Katrina, because the bay is funnel shaped and fairly shallow. And so if a northeaster or a hurricane's coming up the coast and it's angled just right for New York City, it's going to push all that water. And then when bays are shallow, that's when you get the tsunamis in Japan. Harbor wave, that's what that translation means. So you're going to get much higher waves, much higher storm surge. And
You can put them on my desk, hon.
okay, so anyway, New York City could be a Katrina if the conditions are right. What you got there?
I was trying to look it up to see, but it just calls it a hurricane and it doesn't say anything, but I remember.
It was a superstorm, they called it for a long time.
Yeah, that's what I remember. But anyway, okay, thanks. I think, does she want you to get that book out? Is she by herself?
Just returning.
Oh, okay. Alrighty, storm surge, potential. Especially if remember we talked about where it lands, so if it landed in Jersey, 10, 20, 30 miles to the south of the city, the wind would clobber it a lot more. Alrighty, well, Jordan's, let me see, not here, so I'll mention Galveston. The worst natural disaster, I think, even including the last few years, happened in Galveston, Texas, back in 1900, before we had all this communications. Anywhere between 6,000 and 12,000 people died in that storm there in Galveston, Texas, and nearby. It was only a Category 4, but there was it was a huge storm surge. And also, I remember when I read about it years ago, not in 1900, but it must have been some weather book that I read 10, 20, 30 years ago. I remember them saying the weather people further north, like in Chicago, maybe, they knew something was happening because some reporter down there was standing on the beach a day or two before it hit and said, something really weird is going on. And it was the type of wave that was coming in, very far apart, real rollers that was on, and he didn't know what was causing it. And then everybody up north just lost. There was all the radios went down. They couldn't, and telephones, there was no communication with the South Coast. And it was the big storm. Okay, we talked about Katrina in 2005. When the levees broke, the storm surge wound up 23 feet. So think of your house is usually what? Let's say 10 feet to a story. So your second story went under the water. You're up on the roof. If you have, All righty. All right. Do we have any more pictures of?
Not of hurricanes.
Okay. Let's just briefly, because I'm not going to really talk about it, but you looked up the ice storm of, was it 94 in Montreal?
98.
98.
Yeah. Do you want this one or here's a picture of the street.
There's not Montreal in the ice storm. Okay. The French call it the silver rain, and I think it hit, was it January? For some reason,
I think it was
January. And the city of Montreal had 4 huge, what do they call these type of? It's not a telephone pole. It's a monstrous.
Yeah, like an electric transformer.
No, it's a grid. But
Mhm.
in other words, it's not a single telephone,
Mhm.
I call them telephone poles, electric
Mhm.
pole with a line. It's
Mhm.
these, you've seen them, these monster metal things. And they had 4 coming into the city of Montreal. I don't know how many million people live in Montreal at that time. 3 of them went down with the ice. I forget how thick the ice got. It just kept freezing rain for a day or 2 or
Mhm.
whatever. It was 1, 2, 3 inches thick, I think, maybe 4. And part of New York State up in the Adirondacks got clobbered as well. And maybe Vermont, New Hampshire, all on the St. Lawrence River. And Quebec and parts of Ontario were out of electricity for up to 6, 8 weeks. So that was a real disaster. Okay. Now we're going to move on to tornadoes. So why don't we look at a picture or a twister? That's another name for them. Something that I did not know. We call it Tornado Alley. But if you counted up all the tornadoes in the world, something like 90% of them happen in Tornado Alley. I didn't know that. And we have something like on the average 1,300 a year, with another 100 if you go north into Canada, up there in Manitoba, Saskatchewan. So the North America sucks up most of the tornadoes in the world. Now, Melanie asked me why, why are we, why do we have tornadoes in Tornado Alley? Well, it's partly the Rocky Mountains form a barrier and distort the winds coming from the west. But then you have the Great Plains, which is almost 1,000 miles wide and 3,000 miles from Texas up into Canada. Relatively flat. There's the Black Hills here, and the Cypress Hills there, but basically it's flat on a gentle slope towards the Mississippi River. Then what you have to the south are those, do you remember, guys? Elmore Comarc from the past. Maritime tropical air masses, warm and moist, versus the continental polar, cool and dry from the north. And where they meet, roughly between 35 and 45 latitude north, from Texas on up into where they collide, you create the conditions that allow for tornadoes to form. Now, what have we got here? The cold air is, why don't I see any yellow arrows over to the right and just in the middle? And where are the turquoise arrows?
This is just showing that the cold air is descending and the hot air
Is rising. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So it's the cold air then is coming
And then-
down the middle of the tube? Is that right? And the warm air is circling around and rising up?
Yeah.
Alrighty. Without going into great detail, this is similar in formation to a hurricane, only on a much smaller scale. But you have that vortex being formed as the winds begin to circulate once again in a counterclockwise direction as they rise. A hurricane has a huge amount of energy. I forget how many atomic bombs were, depending on the category. This is much more concentrated, but you can really, in the smaller space, have much stronger winds than in a hurricane usually. The hurricane is spread out over a huge area. This is very concentrated. Alrighty.
Certainly, you don't have space, unfortunately.
Usually, they're not much more than a quarter of a mile wide. When you hear about the biggies, they can be a mile wide. They take out the whole, we'll see in a minute, a whole town. And usually they run along the ground for 3 miles or so, and then they dissipate or go back up into the air, come down somewhere else. If you're a religious person that believes in that sort of thing, that God actually intervenes, this kind of a weather system makes you wonder, because there you are sitting in your suburban development. Your house is totally untouched and your neighbor's is gone. And you have to say, why is that? Why is my house spared and theirs destroyed? Well, it's just fate, guys. It's just fate. You built on the wrong acre. Okay. We measure these. I think it's named after some Italian guy who's, I can't pronounce, but we call them Fs, F1 through F5.
Mhm.
And once again, the higher the number, the stronger the winds. The other thing is the Weather Bureau that takes particular care of tornadoes is in Norman, Oklahoma,
Mhm.
which is suitable because that's smack down in the middle of tornado country. Now, we all remember seeing The Wizard of Oz, right?
Mhm.
Okay. You can go switch to the image of Greensboro, is it?
Greensburg.
Greensburg. All righty. I have a personal
Mhm.
story for this in a minute, but before I go there, well, no, maybe we'll start with this. Oh, well, The Wizard of Oz. People who lived on the prairies and out on the plains almost always had a root cellar
Mhm.
or a tornado cellar
Mhm.
or something under the house that, and of course, in those days, years, decades ago, a century ago, there was no warning system.
Mhm.
You had, as a matter of fact, it's a flash memory. When I first moved to Kentucky along the old let me think, northern Kentucky, 3 miles from the Ohio River. It was that first summer. We were we were about like 7 miles out of a small town, and the farmer had sold off, you know how they do along the road, 3-acre lots for houses, and then there was the railroad tracks. And so we lived in one of these houses
Mhm.
out in the country along the 2-lane highway. And I don't know if my neighbor told me or if I happened to be listening to the radio and it came on the radio, or tornado watch.
Mhm.
And there was my neighbor and his 2 teenage sons standing on I can still picture it. They were standing on the roof, looking to the west, just like the pirate ships looking for. Anyway, it didn't hit. We did have a line storm once, but no tornadoes while I was there. However, in that part of Kentucky, almost everybody who had big trees
Mhm.
around their house pollard them, which meant
Mm.
when the tree got to be 20, 30 years old, they would just cut it off at the top.
Mm.
And then it looked horrible. Out of the top there would grow a whole bunch of branches,
Mhm.
like a funny haircut,
Mhm.
but it never got that much taller
Okay.
because of the possibility, as you can see here, all
Mhm.
the trees had been snapped off.
Mhm.
Okay, so that was my sudden memory. As a result of we'll talk about this one in a minute. As a result of this particular, and it was, let me think, when was it? 09, no, 07, I think it hit Greensburg,
Mhm.
Kansas, is a little more than halfway through Kansas. So it's 225 miles to the west of the beginning of Kansas. And as you can see, it's relatively flat, not many trees, except in towns where
Mhm.
people have planted trees and kept them going until they got established. I was teaching art in those days, and so I had my art students the following year do some environmental architectural work.
Mm.
I divided up the country into 5 sections, and 5 or 6 students had Tornado Alley,
Mm.
and they had to design a home that would deal with tornadoes.
Mm.
And one of the most clever ones was, he happened to come from one of the Oriental countries. I forget if it was Japan or China. And he designed his house as a sphere
Mm.
because he had done his research, and the wind blowing over a sphere, think a big ball, is less likely to take your roof off.
Okay.
It just kind of evenly flows around.
Mhm.
But he actually built it on a box. I don't know exactly. He designed some kind of motor,
Okay.
and when the hurricane warning came, the fire whistle, he pressed the button, and the whole house sank down into the basement. It was really clever.
Sounds expensive.
Right. So now I remember listening to the news over the last 20 years or so, more and more schools,
Mhm.
hospitals, and homes, especially with insurance. If you don't build what is called a safe room,
Mhm.
you're not going to get insurance to rebuild
Mhm.
your house when the hurricane takes it out.
Mhm.
So, and you hear about stories of people living through a tornado they hide
Mhm,
in the bathroom, you know, because supposedly the bathtub
know,
gives some
yeah.
protection. Alrighty. Well, this is the town of Greensburg, out in the middle of Kansas, and a town of 7,000 to 8,000 people. And I think this is the 2-lane road in 54 that goes through that town. And I had gone through it once or twice on my journeys west. So when I heard about the disaster on the March News, I was upset, and I heard that they were there was a, do we have a picture of there's a park in the middle of town.
We just had the picture of them.
Okay, and they were requesting donations to replant the trees that had all come down. So I talked the Allegheny County Bird Club into a bit of it, and we both gave, I think, $25 each. And when I went out the following year, I gave it to the group that was doing this. And so I'm gonna say, guys, there's our tree that we helped replant out there.
Mhm.
However, let's back up to what happened. This happened, I think, in March. That August, my daughter and my grandson, who was only 9 at the time, I think, drove through in August. And I decided I'd done that before. I like that route.
Mhm.
So I was gonna show them Greensburg.
Mhm.
And when it happened, you know how they are. People don't listen. You tell them you're driving along, it's the third day. Oh, drive this truck. We were driving the U-Haul truck. So I realized later that they were listening with one ear and it went out the other. We get maybe 10 miles out of town, and my grandson says, you know how kids are, "Ah, firm." And we're in the middle of Kansas. There's
Mhm.
there's nothing there. Jordan, you have to wait. We're gonna get to Greensburg in about 10 minutes. All right. So I pull into the edge of town, and I'm driving. Laura glances out the window and says, "This is a trashy town."
Mm.
Well, of course it's trashy. You can
Right.
see what it looks like. So, and at that point, we're at the edge of town, and Jordan says again, "I gotta go to the bathroom, Mom, Grandma." I said, all right. I said, oh, I see some gas pumps up there at the curb. The gas station will have a bathroom.
Mhm.
We get to the gas pumps.
There was no gas station.
Gas station, these two heavy duty pumps sticking up from the ground. So anyway, we found, if you ever watched MASH on TV, remember those Quonset hut
Yeah.
on the front line hospitals?
Yeah.
That's what they had set up. It was
Oh.
ground, held up by air pressure, maybe 100 feet long, and I don't know, 25, 30 feet
Mhm.
wide. So we stopped there, and the lady said, I explained the situation, the nurse, and she said, "Oh, just go straight down the hall and out the back door. There's a porta potty out there." So we found a bathroom to use. Anyway, so this is what happens sometimes if you have a direct hit.
Mhm.
What I thought was interesting, within 2-3 months, a lot of famous architects from around the world called in, that they would help redesign the town if they wanted.
Mm.
So, and a year or so later, when I went through again, they were rebuilding,
Mm.
but not everybody came back.
Mhm.
So anyway, I think that's all our images for today. What time is it? We're
12:23.
Oh, okay. Well, we're done early. Do you have anything to add?
I don't think so.
Alrighty. What we're gonna do is we have 2 more programs through February, and then we're gonna start in level 2, grow your own. Think I can come up with, oh, guess what I decided? Among other things, because I'm already thinking about what to cover
Mhm.
for the spring, summer, and fall. What do you think of this? Every 2 weeks, I'll have briefly, maybe 5 minutes,
Mhm.
a recipe
Oh, yeah.
that is connected to the season.
Oh, yeah, that's a great
And
idea.
I'll warn you, what's your first fresh vegetable that you eat from the garden? And when?
Lettuce.
Lettuce.
Yeah.
When can you eat your lettuce from the garden?
Probably like, I would say late May,
Okay, yeah.
early June. Yeah.
I'm gonna give you some chives.
Mm.
I have a clump of chives, maybe a